great to see you all, and we are delighted to have Rita back with us, being interviewed by David about her experience in journalism. So I'm going to turn it over to David. As usual, we have a note in group chat. If you have questions, comments, please let me know. And we're delighted to have you back with us, Rita, and you too, David. So we turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Rita Satz, thank you so much for sharing some of your experience with all of us in this second of a three-part series interview with Rita Satz. There was so much to cover in your life and your career, plural, that we wanted to do three interviews. In our last interview, we followed some of your political career. You had work experience as a congressional staff member for the U.S. Representative Richard L. Ottinger, who had an office in Westchester. There's some amazing stories we got from that. You also served as Director of Volunteers for the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs, which is now known as the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs and Worker Protection. And in our final interview, subsequent to today, we're going to take a look at your writings. Rita Satz, the poet, who published two books, which at least one you can find on Amazon. There is Back to the Park, which you published in 2017, and There You Are. Look those up, ladies and gentlemen. Back to the Park, There You Are by Rita Satz. But today, I would like to ask you a few questions and maybe hear a couple of stories about your illustrious career in journalism. You served as a producer and writer of NBC News in New York from 74 to 1998. I'm going to show a few pictures of that in a minute from publications and coverage. You produced the Betty Furness consumer segments that appeared on the Today Show once a week and on the local WNBC station News Center several times a week. Many of these series were investigative reports. You later produced segments for anchors and reporters. But before we get into some detailed questions and show a couple of pictures, Rita, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for being interested.
Oh, we're interested, and we'd love to hear some stories. You know, just to get things started, I have a few images here regarding your career at NBC, and I'd like to bring them up, share my screen, and maybe we could talk just a little bit and have some questions from that. Well, let's start here. Okay, this is well, when you were working with Betty Furness, and here is a review on the WNBC special report on housing for the elderly. This was a significant series and everything like that. What was it like, Rita, working with Betty Furness on this significant project?
Well, I was much younger then, so I would have a much different view. Never thinking then that I would be thinking now, and talking to all of you about alternative living. Working with Betty Furness was always wonderful. She was very bright. She could not go out into the field as I did to get all the cover stuff, but she was marvelous on camera and very good about content. Now, this really surprised me. I was relatively young then. The idea that I would someday be meeting with a group of people talking about where to live late in life for the alternative living arrangements and having one of my own obviously never occurred to me. But this really brought out some interesting alternatives that people were doing. One of which was, I remember I went, about 8 people had rented a whole house, a big house. They had a housekeeper. They had different assignments, and they simply lived together. There were granny houses where I don't know whether that's still popular, or people, the children would build a small house and put it on their property if they had it. The granny would come up to have meals with them or socialize, but she had her own home. Little did I know that a year ago, a friend of mine, not quite a contemporary, because nobody is, everybody's younger than I am, but she's in her 90s, and she tried a living arrangement like that. She hated it. It didn't work at all. She felt isolated in the house and compelled to go up to have dinner. So the viewpoint that you get when you're young of all these stories is interesting. You discover things you don't want to, don't know about. And I was very often surprised at what was popular and what wasn't. What would we get a lot of mail about, what people responded to.
It's interesting that you pay attention to the feedback and allow that perhaps to play a role in how you present to the public. And evidently, this was a popular series and it had an impact on people. I'm going to share just a couple of more images we have regarding that time. Here's a larger image of some coverage of the significant program. And this striking photo here on this, and you had an impact on quite a lot of people. I have another image from NBC here. I believe it's from NBC. Is it this? The winners.
No,
they're
it isn't.
wow. Yeah.
It's from Sigma Delta Phi, which is a national press award organization, and that is when I won the National Investigation Award, and my proudest moment. It was in South Carolina, and I stood on the stage with Cy Feuer getting the award for the adoption series.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And I was in Georgia, and my husband and Betty's husband flew down with us to get the award. That's the most significant award I won, so I'm so glad you showed it.
Yes, yes, ma'am. And speaking of award, you've had a few awards in your illustrious career. Let's mention some of them, shall we? The Sigma Delta Chi Society of Professional Journalists National Award. You won an Emmy and had 8 nominations. An award from the Deadline Club, from Clarion Pinnacle, from the New York State Broadcasters Association, San Francisco Film Festival, the New Jersey District Attorneys Association, and the Council of Churches of the City of New York Silurian Award. So, yeah, you had a few. It wasn't just this one.
I think Honora, who may be in the audience today, won more Emmys than I did.
Okay. Well, that makes her part of a small club.
But what Honora, as you know, was to Gay Pressman what I was to Betty Furness, and she was a wonderful producer. The award, that award was for the adoption series, which was the most significant series, I think, that I did. It had, usually there's no result or impact. I think there was a change in national policy, partly due to that series. And that went on and on and on, and also led to my most dramatic moment of being in a parking lot at midnight with a camera crew to tape a supposedly secret and illegal interchange with a unknown to me guard in the corner of the parking lot with a gun because they were concerned about me being out with a camera crew. And of course, my husband nearly tackled me to keep me down in the apartment from going to do it. But
My word, you put yourself out there.
That
Yes.
adoption series was the most significant.
Well, thank goodness you did that. And while we're talking about awards, here's an image of the Sigma Delta Chi Distinguished Service Award bronze medallion with you being at WNBC. And here we have a group photo.
That is my first, when I first joined, I'm way, 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 way back in the background. I think you can see some people. Honora, I think Honora must be in there, but
my goodness. Wow.
I'm way in the back.
Okay. Well, you were in the forefront and in the company of this gentleman. And that's the way it is with you. And well, who's this fellow here, Rita?
Well, I really got to know Walter Cronkite because of Betty. Betty's husband, Les Midgley, was Walter Cronkite's producer. And he was to her what I was to Betty. So I got to meet him once in a while. This was an award dinner for me, and it was very, very nice of him to show up. Wonderful man, very funny, quite raunchy when he had the opportunity off air. And this was one of the perks of my career is that I got to know him. Slightly.
I'm surprised, Rita, to learn that he was a very funny man when he wanted to be.
Oh, yes. Great sense of humor. And every year the four of them would go sailing because Betty's husband and Walter Cronkite loves to sail, and Betty and Walter Cronkite's wife hated it. So this was an annual test of their love for their husbands.
My goodness, my goodness. So there were, yes, Judy?
David, maybe you're planning to get to us, but I'd love to hear more about the adoption series and how Rita went about it and what she found out. If you want to do that later, that's fine.
Why don't we, Rita, can we do this now? I would love to hear it too.
Sure. Well, what happened is we got a call at the time that I did it. Adoptions were secret. At most places, they were sealed. It was illegal to reveal the adopted parents. The thinking being at that time that the people who adopted children did not want to have someone come knocking at the door and saying, "I'm your child's real mother or father," and laying claim to it. We heard from a man who had adopted a child and who told us that there was a woman who worked in the Department of Records in New Jersey who was selling the names of the adopted children for $300 or $500 to the birth parents who were looking for their children. And this distressed him terribly and thought we ought to catch her. And of course, it was criminal activity. So anyhow, we took it on, and it culminated in him making an appointment to meet her in a parking lot in New Jersey at midnight, parking lot of a supermarket that was naturally closed, and to give her $300 in exchange for the information about where the family was that had adopted, who were looking for his child, the birth parents. So there I was with a camera crew in a truck in a corner of this black deserted parking lot or supermarket. Unbeknownst to me, a guard with a gun in the corner because they were worried about me. And sure enough, up came the car with the woman, He approached her with the money. I came forward with the camera crew, which at that time composed of not only the cameraman, as an oral remember, but also a lighting man, a sound man. We did the transaction. She drove away in tears. We had her on, and I thought that was maybe the end of it. I went home, wrote it, edited it. We went on air the next day. The next thing I heard was from a group of women who said, "We're the ones looking for our children." And it's wrong. We were forced to give them up when we were teenagers, and we have a right to be looking for the children we got. What about our story? That was the next story. Betty Finesse said, "Let's do it." And we did an interview with them, with the parents who were giving them up. Next thing I heard was from children, well, not now children, but the ones who'd been adopted. And they said, "We've been adopted and we know it, but all our lives we've been wondering who our natural mothers and fathers were. And nobody cares about our story that we're told." So we said, "Okay, we'll come and interview them." And we did. We went down to Texas to I'm ashamed to say they even called it a home for unwed mothers who were there waiting to give up their children for adoption. And so that became our 3-part series, and the one for which I won the most awards, and the one I think in which I take the most pride, because I think eventually I changed the laws about adoptions, which are now not sealed. So that, I think, was the most significant for me.
And consequently changed the lives of some people,
Yes.
not only then, but continuing into the future because of the changes.
There were poignant moments I will never forget. One of them in a home for unwed mothers in Texas, where else, I sat, and I'm not really proud of this because it was overly sentimental. I taped, to my shame, an empty rocking chair, but the rocking chair had been occupied by a young woman who was pregnant, waiting to give up her child for adoption against her will. But she said to me, and I will never forget these words, "My mother said I had to, because if I had a child out of wedlock, how could she ever show up at the mall?" And that said it all. So anyhow,
somebody has to look out for the mothers as well as the children.
Well, I'm glad to say it. I think most of the stories we do, and Nora will agree, we do them, and we maybe like them or maybe don't, but they become history. But every once in a while, you do something that you think really has an impact. And of course, Betty Furness was really bright, compassionate, talented woman who was marvelous to work for and marvelous on screen.
Yes, ma'am. Rita, at some points during this conversation, could we open it up to see if anybody has any questions? Would that be okay?
Sure.
All right. Anybody have any questions so far on this significant expose?
Well, Julia Richmond, were you a few years apart? Were you interested in journalism even in high school, or when did this interest really begin with you?
No. What happened is after the congressman I worked for lost his bid for Senate, and I was out of a job, and I decided I'd volunteer somewhere, and I decided to volunteer down at I think they were down at Liberty Street or someplace, when you were answering consumers for questioning with complaints. And Betty Furness was commissioner at that time. First Bess Meyerson and then Betty. And then Betty was hired by NBC to be the first really consumer reporter. And she had liked my work and asked if I would come up and consider working on helping to answer the volunteers, answer the questions from consumers that they simply couldn't cope with. So I came up to really handle the volunteers who were asking, and they ended up giving me a job. And one day I got a call from I had nothing to do with putting stories on air. But one day I got a call from the news director, and there was a story in New Jersey that had to be covered immediately. And for some reason or other, there was no producer available. And would I go out with the camera crew who couldn't do it alone and supervise it? I went and I did, I think, the smartest thing I ever did, and probably through my whole career, is say to this grizzled cameraman whom Honora will probably remember, I don't know how to do this. And he said, well, I think you ought to maybe shoot that. It was, by the way, it was 3 men, a cameraman, a lighting man, and a sound man was crew, and a courier to take the tape back to the building. If I had said, shoot this, shoot this, shoot that, he would have shot this, shot that, and I would have had probably a lot of trouble writing the story. And that was a lesson to me. When I went back to the building, I had to look at the tape. Remember, tape, miles of tape that a man stood cutting and editing. And when I went into the editing room, I said to the editor, I don't know how to do this. I knew how to write. I wrote the story, but I didn't know how to edit it. And that made all the difference and a big lesson to me. It was the beginning of my career as a producer. Never occurred to me that I would produce news stories.
Cooperation can make all the difference. A wise person once said, when in doubt, delegate. But in the ancient Greeks, yes, ma'am?
My one was, when in doubt, ask for help.
Yes, ma'am. And it certainly paid off. Didn't the ancient Greeks say that the beginning of wisdom is to say, I do not know? And apparently it worked.
It helped, that's for sure. But I had no idea of ever becoming a news producer. And I think it was Betty's confidence, ability, and generosity in sharing with me the praise that she got for deservedly so, because she was very, very good on camera and when she was in the field reporter. So I was lucky. I was in the right place at the right time.
And this led to you producing many other things for quite a period of time while you were at NBC, didn't it?
Yes.
And did you remain a producer throughout your career, or did you have sometimes a role as producer, sometimes merely as a journalist, or was it always integrated?
It was always integrated. There was always an on-air camera, an on-air person, which you needed, obviously, to present the story. Not all of them. I think Gabe Preston and a few others had producers, but Betty and Gabe were the main ones. But occasionally, Chuck Scarborough, who was the anchor, would do a story, or one of the other big stars that they had there at the time. And they would ask me to do a story for them. So I produced for the anchors and for a lot of the on-air people. I actually spent one whole night at I guess they called, at that time, they actually called it an insane asylum. They don't do that anymore. Doing a story with an on-air person, but they varied. It was a marvelous career because it was so varied. You would go from doing a light piece to I did pieces for Al Roker, believe it or not, and I have to tell you that the only talent, on-air talent, that I ever had difficulty with was Al, because he was mocked all the time. He was wonderful. He was amenable. He was bright. He was all the things that you see on air. He really is. But as soon as he stood up to do a stand-up, we got mocked. And there was something about him that made people feel he was accessible, and never had people, they'd stand back a little bit and watch you do your work and maybe come up for an autograph. But interesting to me that warmth of personality translated so much to the public.
Two sides of a delightful coin. I have a somewhat technical question, Rita. What was it like to show up at a location with a cameraman and a sound man? I mean, today you'd have somebody next to you with their cell phone capturing the film and the sound all in one. I mean, how big were the cameras on a lot of these shoots?
Big, heavy ones. They had to put them on a tripod.
Yeah.
They would put it on a tripod for an interview, because you were standing there for a long time doing the interview. Obviously, if you were catching somebody on the street, you would just walk along with the camera and hope they didn't notice you. There was a rule then that you couldn't interview children. Excuse me, you couldn't show children on the street without their parents' consent. So when we did children, we had to do their legs next to the parent. There were rules on phone conversations. Strangely enough, the rule on phone conversations, which sometimes were gotcha conversations, you started a conversation and be taping it. If one person knew that the conversation was being taped, it was legal. And that person could be me, the interviewer, which was completely wrong, of course. It should have been the person who was to be interviewed who knew that their conversation or their interview was being taped. They didn't know necessarily unless I told them.
I think one point is that those laws vary from state to state. So it depends on where you're recording.
This was New York.
Right, exactly. And New York is one of those states that allows, surreptitious, essentially, recording of an interviewee.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Rules are different in California. Judy, yes.
Yeah, there's a question in chat from Joan. Can you spell out for us what a producer is? She said she always thought a producer is someone who puts up the money, which maybe that applies to Broadway or whatever, I don't know. But you seem to be saying that you went out on site to do or get the stories.
That's exactly what you do. It was your responsibility as producer to see that the talent, whether the talent went out and did the interview or not, I would write the story, go in and with the editor and edit the story. So you in effect produce what went on the air. Various journalists had a different input. I went to an out with Gabe and tried to work with him the way I work with Betty, and he kind of brushed me aside. He evidently liked to do more of his hands-on interviewing than Betty did, or could. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You know, I mean, we often had uh vigorous discussions
I heard
about what the
you-
reporting should be. But yes, he was very hands-on. He decried, you know, a lot of the reporters who would sit at their computers and, you know, get information over the phone, but wouldn't actually face to face, you know, look somebody in the face and ask them tough questions.
Well, I would be the face, but would Gabe let you be the face?
Oh yeah, no, I did interviews for him all the time, but you know, he himself wanted to be there,
Yeah,
you know, and not necessarily have it interpreted through somebody else.
yeah,
But that was just his style. He was a street reporter from, you know, the get-go.
right. And Betty, of course, had come from movies.
Betty, what?
Betty had come from being
Oh yeah,
a
right.
movie starlet, who then ended up at the Department of Consumer Affairs, following Bess Myerson.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that long ago, and then was called up to NBC, WNBC, when they were starting this new program and the Consumer Reporter. And I was really called up to try and help answer all the constituents who were calling it.
Well, do you
Rita, did
remember?
you go ahead, Nora? Sorry.
Do you remember she was also married to Les Midgley, who
Mhm.
was at that time president or vice president of NBC News? So I'm sure that,
Well,
you know, she
before
probably,
that, he was Walter Cronkite's producer.
right. But
It
then
wasn't until the last couple of years that he was
it
vice.
was at NBC. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's when it overlapped with you, but you know, maybe there was pillow talk about how great Rita Satz was, and that helped your career too.
So I have a question. Did you work with Bess Myerson? She started out as Miss America. She was the first Jewish Miss America, but that ended up in big scandal. Did you get involved with her or know what was going on?
I did. After Dick Ottinger lost, I went down to the Department of Consumer Affairs to volunteer. They had a group of men and two women who were trying to answer the questions. And for some reason or other at that time, I think because she was made herself so visible, she really created the image of the Department of Consumer Affairs, and loads of people, hundreds of people were encouraged at that time to write in their problems because Bess was such a good showwoman. She was all over the place, but Lindsay at that time was mayor. And when Lindsay went out and a beam came in, he brought in Eleanor Guggenheimer, and she became a very different commissioner. But Bess was a showwoman.
Mm.
She would go out in the market and hold up the chicken. You know, she understood what the medium could do more than I think than any other. And of course, I don't know that people bother now with the department now.
Well, news brings us information, and from information can come power, and power can move in all kinds of ways. Did you ever have a story where you encountered opposition? Somebody took exception and tried to keep the story from being aired.
Yeah, Revlon. The only lawsuit that we were threatened with was from Revlon. There was some ingredient in it, I can't remember now what, which was misrepresented as to what it could do, and it also could possibly be harmful. And they threatened a suit. And for the only time I remember, NBC's lawyer and I, not Betty, but I, because they named me because I was the one who showed up and did the interview, went to meet in their law offices for the first meeting. And on the way up in the elevator, I remember the lawyer cautioned me so often about what I should not say and what I should not answer that I finally said to him, if they ask me my name, is it all right if I tell them it's Rita Satz? By the time we got up to the offices, they had changed their mind. I don't know what happened. They told us the meeting was postponed and they called it off. So we were only threatened once with a lawsuit, which I consider a pretty good tribute because clearly people are, if you've done them wrong, if you lied or misrepresented, they were pretty likely to want to sue, and they didn't. I think the biggest other story I ever did was on radon, and that didn't get as much publicity because we interviewed the man who discovered that radon was very harmful and that people were dying from being enclosed in closed spaces with this natural gas. And steps were taken and lives were saved. And although I think that's drawn less attention than any story I've ever done, it probably had the most impact.
It's surprising. That is, in fact, surprising. Did you have liberty to choose the stories as you will, to write what you wrote without much editing from superiors or whatnot? Did they give you free rein, Rita?
Yeah, pretty much.
Marvelous.
Betty was a good writer. She would sometimes, she would always have input into what I wrote. I found the writing the easiest somehow. The editing, if you had a good editor, was awfully tough because you're diluting hours of material into 4, 5, 3, maybe if you have a series, half an hour of material. That's tough. And luckily, the writing would come easiest to me. I would pretty much write it in the car coming back from the location. And Betty had a lot of input into it. She would look at it, have suggestions, but then I had to go in, and it was easier, obviously, when we were no longer on tape. But the courier would take the tape back to the building before you got there so that somebody could start working on cutting it up and trying to get it into 2 hours
Yes,
material into 3 minutes of a story.
well, on the lighter side, in your career and the productions you've done, the stories you've covered, making every week different than the week before, you've probably covered a wide range of stories, situations, experiences, emotions. What are some of the funnier moments that you've had?
Kids.
Yes, ma'am. What was it?
The Cabbage Patch Kids. Did any of you ever have Cabbage Patch Kids or your children? We had more mail, more response, more viewer involvement in the story we did about Cabbage Patch Kids than I have ever done with the story. I got a call one day from a woman, Betty put me on with her, who said she just had a strange experience. She'd called up to buy a doll that she had heard was very attractive from a company in Georgia. And the man who answered the phone, or the woman, said every time she said doll, the woman said baby. And every time she said buy, the woman said adopt. And she said, this place claims that they don't sell dolls, they adopt babies. And I said to Betty, I think we're going to go to Georgia. And we did, and had this incredible experience of doing this bizarre story, which was loads of fun, and ended up Betty's best closing line that I edited. She was holding one of the babies, and I guess somebody said to her, you have to name it. And she said, George. And then she looked up at the camera and she said, this is ridiculous. And I edited it right there. We ended the spot on this is ridiculous, which didn't stop everybody. Brian Gumble stopped me in the elevator and asked me to get him a Cabbage Patch Kids because now they were impossible to get. And it's the only time Brian Gumble was ever nice to me.
Goodness. That remark might have even helped sell the set.
I am, well, I cannot explain the phenomenon. Incidentally, in preparation for doing this, I remember the Cabbage Patch story. And of course, Betty and I bought them, and we were not accepting as gifts for our children. And I asked my children if they still had their Cabbage Patch dolls, because I read, I looked them up. They are now vintage ones in good condition are selling for $8,000. You know, you're going to look in your closet.
Wow. Nostalgia plus. My goodness. Rita, you taught inside TV news at Marymount College in Manhattan. Your students, were they aspiring journalists themselves who wanted to go into the profession?
No, they were just interested in the stories. I would of course, I then had the tape available, both the outtakes and the edited story, and I would pick a subject, and it's hard to believe, but at that time we had very big classes at Marymount, and people were very much interested, evidently, in television journalism. They certainly didn't know me, and my first class had 60 students just interested in what I think my theory is everybody likes to go backstage. And I was taking everybody backstage in what they watch on the news every night. Everybody watched the news. Everybody watched small segments. And this was an opportunity to go back. That's the only explanation, because they certainly didn't know me. I do apologize for my voice. It was a great day to have laryngitis.
We can still hear you, Rita, and we appreciate you taking your time and telling us some of your experiences. And, you know, you're giving us a little bit of insight here too, and allowing to see the stories that we enjoy on the news from a different perspective. And some of them are rather historic and everything like that. Did your students have a favorite story, or were they just interested in anything and everything that they could learn?
I think they were interested in the process. If there was a story, they had seen the story, or if it was a story, it was 3 minutes or 5 minutes. The adoption series interested them because we went on to do that from so many different points of view. Where to Live Late Life interested them. But I think they were just interested in what I said before. Everybody likes to go backstage.
Yes, and see behind the scenes and everything like that, the story behind this story. And you brought that to them as you're bringing it to us. Does anybody have a question at this point? Oh, McGee Hickey. Yes, ma'am. Unmute if you please. Oh, let's see.
She's
I believe you're
she'll
muted.
yeah. We
We
can't
need to
hear
get a
you.
microphone on.
And Anara also wants to ask, so after McGee.
Let's see.
Okay, well, tell you what, why don't you want to go to Anara? Can you unmute Anara?
Sure. So Rita, am I remembering correctly that before your TV career, you worked also for a politician, a progressive politician?
Yes, I did a class on that when you were away in our.
Oh, okay.
I worked for Dick Ottinger.
Oh,
And
right.
the reason I ended up as a volunteer at the DCA and then ended up in the news is because he ran for Senate and lost. But I was on his staff for 8 years.
And what did you do there?
I worked in his district office, and you did everything. But the truth is, from the day he was re-elected or elected, what you were really doing is working on the next election. Mostly what you were dealing with constituents, resolving their complaints, helping them, and booking him for when he came up to the district. But as I did say before, the minute you sat down at your desk in your office after he was elected, you were working on him being reelected.
We have McGee.
Yes,
go ahead.
sorry, I needed some help. My
McGee
daughter's here because I'm on my iPhone. How to un. I love to always hear Rita talking about life in the earlier days of TV news. Rita and I overlapped in the 80s at Channel 4. And I wonder, Rita, if you could talk about what you see TV news like today compared to what it was when you were there. When you talk about a three-man crew, and there were probably days where you would go out on a story after researching it one day, and then you'd have another day to edit. And as you know, I'm still a working journalist, and sometimes I'm given an hour to do my story. And so I just wondered your insight, since you're someone who was there at the beginning.
McGee, I don't think I could do what you do. I didn't know you were here. I would have said hello before. McGee keeps me in touch with former colleagues and keeps me feeling I'm still a little bit a part of that world, which I really appreciate. And I can't describe then. You would go out on a story with three men, a cameraman. The first one I went out with was a grizzled old man, thank goodness, who took care of me, a sound man, a lighting man, and a courier to take the tape back to the building to start cutting the tape. And you would be writing, I would be writing the story in the car on the way back, because there was no way to transmit it. Eventually, I didn't even start this way. I had to use a courier. Eventually, we had a phone in the car, so I could phone into the editor and tell him, this is what I've got and this is what I'm writing. I would start writing, go back to the building, type it, because that's what we had then, typewriters, try to get all this material down to 3 minutes, go into the editing room where you hoped that the man who was in charge of cutting the tape had not cut the part you want and thrown it away in the barrel. That had to be then spliced together, and you put together your story. And as I'm talking to you, I can't imagine how we ever got on the air.
But I'm in awe of the attention to detail and the thought that there was time to do research, and there was also attention to what will be the aftermath and the reverberations of this. Now we really fly by the seat of our pants and just hope we're
Yeah, but
getting everything right.
it depended. I mean, if I was doing a series or a spot that we chose, which is most often you had a little time to think of it beforehand, and I could make some phone calls beforehand and did. I'd pick the people I was going to interview. Now you get your story that day, don't you, McGee?
Yes, and not only do you get the story, as you well know, because when we have lunch on Fridays, generally I pitch the story. I have set it up on my own time,
yeah.
and hope that it's going to come through the way that I hope it will be. But there was so much more time back in the time that I was at Channel 4 in the mid 80s to do research. You could actually say to the assignment desk and the producers, oh, I need a day to make phone calls and find out if this is really a story.
And I had weeks sometimes on a big story. If we decided that we were going to make it a series, we would have a long time.
I wish that still existed. I always explain to people that I'm on stories with, that I'm about to interview. I go, I'm so sorry. Time is money. I have like 5 minutes to interview you, and I have to get this on the air in 1 hour, and, it's just unfortunate what has happened. I wondered, without being too political, how you see the present, or have you already touched upon this? The news media is under attack now. And when I was starting out and when you were in it, we were truth seekers where people did not question. We were always trying to tell the story the best way we could, the most honest way we could. No one assumed we had an agenda, and we didn't have an agenda. We were truth seekers, and now there's a whole other world of a way to view the media. And I wonder, how does that make you feel, Rita?
Completely different. You would no more consider or be allowed to have your point of view some even leak through, even be apparent. You were there to report what happened and what other people thought, unless you were doing an editorial or doing an opinion piece, and then you were allowed to do it. But it would then be announced as such. If Betty Furness were, for example, to end the adoption series by saying, I think changes will be coming or whatever, that would be labeled as a completely different piece. There's no way that it could be part of news reporting, because it wasn't news reporting, it was her opinion. I think there's a huge change. And I think people don't, I think maybe only those of us who remember the way it used to be care. I think the people who have always seen television, people either openly or inadvertently reveal their preferences or their opinions, I don't think it bothers them. It would drive me crazy.
Used to be that, oh, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to pick up and following on the political thing. Donald Trump, leaving aside whether people here love him, hate him, or somewhere in between, seems to have a great talent for coming up with just about every day something that news people feel they have to talk about. It seems to me sort of a special talent. It's hard, I think, if you're a news, to ignore. I mean, I pick up my New York Times print every day. I read it online also, and there he is, 2-3 stories every day on the front page. Want to talk about that, his ability to get headlines and attention?
It's it's accepted now. It's different. I don't like it, and nobody cares that I don't like it. This is what the Times feels it has to do to get attention.
Not just the Times, though, not just the Times.
I don't think it matters, because I don't think the young people are ever going to be watching newspapers. I think they're going. I don't know whether we're the last generation, or well, not me, you're. I can't see newspapers existing as we remember them. I have to tell you, when you talk, I had a very emotional moment once in television. The privilege, the kinds of things I think that we're maybe not going to see as much or see more, but I went to China with the Basketball Players Association group that took a trip every year. And I went to Beijing with a camera crew from the Today Show when Beijing's very first time of opening to the Western world, or to the world. The streets of Beijing, those of you who have been here recently won't believe this, were empty. I had to get a camera crew from Japan. There was no camera crew, and they had to ship a car over because there was no crew car. And I stood with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in front of the Great Hall of the People. I stood on a ladder with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I still can't say it, with my hand up in the air with a camera, interviewing him, and him saying, "This, to me, is the most wonderful thing that television has been able to do. Allah tells you to go to the furthest place in the world for you, and there you will find peace and be sanctified. And thanks to television, I am in the furthest place I have ever been." That was very moving to me, in the realization of power that we had, but also power to do good, not just to influence. I think that's going. I really do. I think it's going to be. I don't know where young people are going to get their interviews, or who they're going to trust when there's AI. Who do you know? How do you know who you're talking to? I might not have liked the interviewer, but I knew who he was, and I maybe knew his. Maybe I knew what he believed. I think that's going.
Used to be that there was reporting, the journalist would tell you what is happening. And then there was commentary, which is what somebody thought was happening. And then editorial, where somebody would speak on what they think should be happening. And it was always separated. We would say, you'd be watching maybe an anchor person on TV, and they say, "And now for a commentary from so-and-so," or an editorial. And they would introduce it as such. But Louis Rukeyser, in an interview, once said that now when you're getting a story, you're getting the views of the newscaster mixed in with the story. I remember, Rita, where we used to debate the virtues of one politician versus another. But now I hear people debate about what newscaster they listen to. Well, the opinions of my newscaster is much better than the opinion of yours. And that's right now. But I'm hoping things go full cycle, because the pendulum does swing both ways. And well, it's going to be very interesting to see how things evolve. And you're going to have a perspective on it better than any of us, Rita, because of your rich experience.
Be here.
You might surprise us. You never know. If you're here at 110, we have to do another 3 interviews.
My mother would
be careful. If you say yes, I'll hold you to it.
As my mother would say, bite your tongue.
Well, this is very, very rewarding. Rita, what advice would you give to people who are seeking to go into journalism today? That's maybe a loaded question, but would you have any advice for somebody in that regard?
I think probably to be realistic. Uh, 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 it's hard to say because if you're an older person, you're not doing it, don't have expectations. The only advice I can ever give anybody is to be as honest as you can. I think the best work I ever did was when I said to somebody, I don't know how to do this. And I think to be honest about what you can do and what you can't do, and to be firm about what you believe you should do when you're experienced enough to be able to resist being asked to do things you don't think you should. I think it all comes down to honesty.
Words to the wise. Judy, do we have any other questions pending at this time?
Questions or comments would be welcome. I want to go back to the to Donald Trump because you were talking about newspapers. What about from the TV news angle, both the broadcast networks and the cable networks? Again, I think he has an ability just about every day to say something maybe purposely outrageous that gets attention. And is that a special talent he has? Should the networks be treating him differently or occasionally just even ignoring him?
I don't know. I don't know if they can. It's the president of the United States calls a press conference. If he lets you in, you go. I think there's a difference between showing up and giving in to his opinions. I don't think you have to accept everything. I think you have to report what he says, but I think journalism will be changing. I don't think people are going to be satisfied with just putting somebody on and listening to what they say and without any opinion. I think journalism, as Nora and I knew it, and McGee knew it, and McGee still knows it to some, although differently from before, is fading. I think we're watching the death of it. And what will take its place, I don't know. I don't know if you will agree, McGee and Nora.
Yeah.
I would say that when Donald Trump was a candidate, he would throw out these, red herrings or, little bits of chum, in the water, and then everybody would, swim towards it and, gravitate towards it and report on it endlessly, for half an hour. I think when he was a candidate, there was actually a responsibility to ignore some of the more outrageous things or the things that were never going to materialize. I think the problem is now he's the president. So, anything he says has an effect, whether it's going to actually happen or not. So it has to be reported on. I think that maybe, we just need to put it more in perspective and, say, well, he said this before and it never came to be, or, this is something that, whatever the perspective is. But I think that sometimes it just gets reported in this, uncontextual way.
What would you do, Nora, if you went out with, gone out with Gabe to interview?
Pardon?
What would you have done? What are your choices if you were going out with Gabe now and Trump were giving an interview? You'd have to cover.
Yeah, of course, because he's the president. But sometimes there are these executive orders and there are other things that he said, that he tweets about or whatever that, we don't have to so breathlessly report about it, I would say.
I agree.
Okay, we're going to go to Bernie, then to Eleanor. I have some questions as well, and then back to Honora. So, Bernie, go ahead, please.
Rita, I know that throughout your career you had many, many offers for other kinds of jobs in the media, and I think you turned down some of them. I don't know if you want to talk about any of that.
No.
Okay.
But
No,
I can tell
I
you one thing that Rita is a great editor. I've always run many of the articles that I publish past her, and she always, with her keen eye and ear, has good things to say. And I'll just give one incident where she read one of my pieces and was critical about something. She said, "Well, what you have here at the end should be at the beginning." And I wasn't quite sure about that. And I ran it past an editor friend of mine who had previously been the editorial director of an imprint of HarperCollins. And she said, no, it's pretty good the way it is. I'd leave it alone. But I still wondered about it. And I rewrote it according to Rita's suggestion. So I saw no harm in that. And I ran it past that editor again. And she said, yes, it's much stronger this way. Tell your friend that she was right about that.
thank you, Bernie. It's good to be right.
Let's go to Eleanor. Go ahead, Eleanor, please.
Okay. As you know, Trump had a press conference today with the president of South Africa. And I turned on late, so I didn't hear who the actual reporter was, but he was from NBC. So what I think TV broadcast journalists have to put up has never existed before. Trump said in response to this NBC TV reporter, "You're so stupid and you're such an idiot that you don't deserve to be on NBC." And there was a silence. I
Oh,
don't
boy.
anybody's ever put up with that before. And I'm sure the journalists would have loved to tell him, "You're such a stupid president. We've never had one like you before." But he didn't say anything, of course. I've never seen anything like that.
But what could he do?
He just was quiet. That's all.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Let me ask a question about news, and then Nora, bring you in on that. The PBS and NPR, Trump hates them. Republicans, a lot of them hate them too. I think that they've blocked funding, I believe. Can you talk a little about what you think their role is, and have they played it straight down the middle, NPR and PBS?
I think they're doing a good job. I don't know how long they last. I don't know what their future is, but I think now I think people who are for Trump will not agree with me. They will say that they are too prejudiced against him and do too many stories. So I guess it's your point of view of where you are. I think they're trying to present the people who agree with them to tell you about it, but not to pretend that they can take everything he says as fact. They question him, they challenge him, and I guess because I agree with them, but maybe I'm not sure that I'm right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. A question from Joan in chat. Isn't the basic issue that the American public has different standards now? Is it getting what it wants, and advertisers are financially motivated to deliver? So, Joan, if I didn't read that well, if you want to come in, feel free. Yeah.
No, you did
Are
read,
they?
probably
Go
was
ahead, Joan.
it was probably crafted badly. The issue I see is that the media is delivering what the public's appetite is. And that's the problem. The public's appetite, the mentality that prevails in this country is almost, they love the reality shows. They love the insults. That's our problem. They're only getting what they really want to see.
Well, I think you have to remember is that news, like anything else, is there to make money. They're businesses. They're not free. And if they're giving the public what it wants, I don't agree with it. I think it has to be even-handed. I think they see themselves as businesses who are catering to their customers. And I think that's a terrible way for news to be, but I think it's true. And I don't.
Yeah. Go ahead, Rita.
It may have been, or must have been that way to a certain extent, because news was never a philanthropy. It was always there to make money. But I do think there was a real effort and a real constriction on what you could do to make money on news, that you had to be truthful, you had to be even-handed. And I think those boundaries are gone.
I disagree with you slightly, Rita, because I think at some point news organizations felt that they needed to break even. They were not considered a profit center.
Well, that's true.
And I think it was shortly, I kind of remember it being around when GE took over RCA, that it became more of a drive, to make money and to monetize the news, versus offering it as a public service. And, mostly trying to break even. Obviously, they couldn't, they didn't want to lose money, but, we were producing at NBC prior to that, white paper documentaries. There was a whole documentary unit, at NBC. And, I don't know that they ever made money. I kind of doubt that they ever did. But, they were very important topics that were covered. And, were, and it was just a given that was our responsibility. To report on bigger topics.
But also to get viewers. I remember being shocked one day when a higher up at NBC said to me, "You sold tickets last night." And that was the first indication anybody got to. They were watching very carefully
the ratings. Yeah,
absolutely. And whether you consider that being a profit, it may not have been a monetary profit, but it was your job profit. Because if the ratings weren't good, you weren't going to be vice president anymore.
I do think the needle kind of moved more towards that way, in the 80s.
I do.
Versus, earlier.
I do.
Who was that guy? Do you remember? Just a little gossip.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah. You don't remember who it was? Who said you sold tickets?
It was Norm.
Who?
Norm. I can't remember his last name.
And Nora, you had another question you wanted to ask? I think.
This is really off topic, but this is one of my favorite Rita stories. This is about when she took a trip to Japan, right? You were going to Japan with Neil Simon and his wife.
Yes.
And the drama that ensued during the flight.
Actually, we made an emergency. We were on the way to Japan, and we stopped at Hawaii to refuel. And Neil had written Plaza Suite and had given my husband the script to read on the flight. Our takeoff was aborted, and we came down the emergency chutes with all the Japanese businessmen around across the field, and had to spend the night in Hawaii. And we're supposed to take the next flight the next day to Japan. With great difficulty, we found a hotel and got to it, a Marriott, and they had no room. They said that they didn't have any vacancy. Somebody told us that. And finally, my husband did what he hated to do, but he took the clerk aside and said, the man with me is the famous playwright, Neil Simon. And he said, well, let me call the manager. And the manager came out and he looked at Neil Simon, looked at my husband and said, didn't you go to DeWitt Clinton? And Bud said, yes. And he found us a suite for for me.
Wow.
And Neil's fame as a playwright was somewhat diminished in his eyes, but not in ours.
I'm remembering though that you had to leave the plane like with with nothing. You weren't allowed to take anything, including the script, the Plaza Suite script.
Oh, and that's true. Neil did turn to Bud. He was a very proper man, by the way. When Bud produced the script and said to him, Neil said, I forget what he said, but Bud said, I have the script, and took it out of his pocket.
Oh, great.
Neil said to him, Bud, they told you you had to leave everything on the plane. And Bud said,
but it was the only copy, right?
Right. He rushed it.
So it would have been lost to history had your husband not broken the rules.
It may be well lost because I'm really not sure to this day that was the only copy. I don't quite trust you. We call it Doc, actually, but you're right. He said, but he was very proper, very proper.
Well, that's why God invented carbon paper. Malcolm has a question. It's a big one, but since we're running a little overtime, can answer it briefly. He asks, what about the 24-hour news cycle and its impact on how TV news is delivered?
What about it?
Well, there's constant news and they've got to fill 24 hours. There are some repeats, but they keep trying to find breaking news.
Well, if people are willing to watch it, I don't have to watch it. They're not doing it unless they think it's profitable or will be profitable. I don't know what they put on in its place, whether they should we may be going to only a few hours of television and a lot of dead air. And I don't know what the economics of that will be. So I am completely unequipped, unlike everything else I say, to answer that question.
Well, it was comfort to me to know that if I woke up at 1 a.m. last night, I could turn on C-SPAN and watch people voting in Congress. Well, we're going to wrap up and remind everybody that Rita will be back with us, interviewed again by David a week from today, and on her work in poetry. David, do you want to give us a brief comment on that?
I sure do, Judy. Rita, we're going to ask you about some of your poems, and I may ask what you were thinking when you wrote them, what you put into them, or what motivated you to write them. And we're going to take a look at some of your poems specifically and talk to them. I hope Barry Wallenstein drops by to see what's going on. But I have had a bit of a sampling of your poetry, Rita, and I'm looking forward to this interview most of all.
That's very kind of you. And I want to thank all of you being this interested in what I consider a not very interesting person, but thank you all for your kindness and for my association with all of you, which means a lot to me.
Well,
Thank you,
we're
Rita.
delighted that we have you. Again, Rita was one of the first people, along with Bernie, that got CLNL started and has played an enormous role ever since then. Her class was the first one, one of the first ones I took, and here I am all these years later, like a lot of you. So with the news, with Rita, there are no blues. That's my little poem. Can we all please thank Rita?
Thank you, Rita.
Thank
you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.